You're from Mountain, I actually.
All right, well, good morning. My name is David Carrot-Howery. I'm chair of Drake University's Environmental Science and Policy Program, and I'm here with colleagues representing a coalition of scientists and educators from across Iowa. Our goal is to clearly communicate the expected impacts of climate change on Iowa to ensure that decisions are based upon accurate, current scientific information. On behalf of scientists and educators across Iowa in climate and climate-impacted fields, today we're releasing the 2015 Iowa Climate Statement, A Time for Action. This is the 5th annual statement that Iowa climate scientists and educators have released since 2011. This one is signed by 188 scientists from 39 colleges and universities, representing nearly all of the colleges and universities in the state with faculty expertise in the area. In previous years, we've discussed general climate expectations, drought, agriculture, and human health impacts, always with a focus on the effects in our state. This year, with presidential candidates visiting Iowa for the 2016 caucuses, we felt that it made sense to step back, summarize what we've done in the past, and encourage Iowans to find out from politicians how they expect to engage this issue. Thinking about impacts in Iowa, in the U.S., and globally, it's clear that to address climate change is one of the most, or how to address climate change is one of the most important choices that a president is going to make. Whether he or she wants to reduce carbon emissions, come up with a plan to cope with expected damages, or ignore the issue and leave the cost to our children. Like most Iowans, we take very seriously the responsibility we have to help select the next leader of our country. But we've been surprised in previous elections how little candidates from either party have talked about the impact on the global climate and how it will affect citizens at home. This is unacceptable, and we're calling on voters in the state and members of the press who are interviewing candidates or asking them questions in debates to make sure that anyone who wants to be president has the opportunity to spell out clearly for voters how they'll deal with this most critical of issues. Now, before getting into the specifics on the statement, I'd like to introduce some of our lead authors and participants in this year's document who are here to talk about the statement and answer questions that you might have. So we have Chris Anderson. He is the Assistant Director of the Climate Science Program at Iowa State University. Jean Tockley, the Director of the Climate Science Program at Iowa State University. Yogi Shah, the Associate Dean in the Department of Global Health at Des Moines University. And Diane Dubinsky, Professor of Ecology, Evolution, and Organismal Biology at Iowa State University. We're going to begin this morning with some comments from Dr. Anderson. So, Chris.
Okay, thank you and good morning. We're here to talk about today the importance of climate change as an issue in the upcoming caucus discussions. The reason that this is important is currently there are 13,974 peer-reviewed scientific publications that have diagnosed causes behind changes in measurements. And of these, 13,950 have pointed to humans as a primary cause. And to put this in perspective, you might think of our peer review process as something like getting a second medical opinion. When you are diagnosed with an illness, you might go to a second doctor to have a better understanding of what that illness is about and to have a second diagnosis. In our case, we have 13,974 second medical opinions. And of those, only 24 have not seen the presence of human-caused climate change. So in Iowa, we are already feeling the effects of climate change. It has affected our rainfall first and foremost. It has secondarily affected our temperature. And this causes some confusion, primarily because the mainstream message about climate change is of ever-increasing temperature. But in Iowa, we tap into the water that comes from the oceans. And this is what allows us to have a very abundant and agriculturally active state. The water in the oceans has changed. It has warmed considerably and has released more water into the air. And just like this weekend, when we had a storm come through and provide more rainfall, then if there's more water in the air, those storms provide more than we normally would have had. So what we have seen is, in Iowa, an increased frequency in the number of excessively wet springs and an increased frequency in the number of excessively wet days. And these are causing substantial damages to our cities and to our farmland. Our temperature effects are primarily seen in the wintertime, in the fall and in the springtime, where temperature increases have occurred, and also where the first frost of the year has occurred earlier in the year, and the last frost of the year has occurred later in the year. Going forward, we fully expect that the rainfall changes will intensify, and that means the harms that Iowans are feeling from them will also intensify. And we expect to see the temperature emerge as another factor that we have to deal with. We have seen a glimpse of this in the 2012 drought. That was a very hot summer, an unusually hot drought. And in fact, going forward, our hot droughts that we expect to see will consider the 2012 drought a cool drought. Something that we might wish for in the future is something that we just had in the past. Finally, this is a big important issue in Iowa because we have ready-made solutions for dealing with climate change. Not only have we invested in renewable energy and made it a staple of our economy, but Iowa has a carbon sequestration factory. Every spring you see our farmland green up and you see trees green up. This is a way to take carbon out of the air. And because of this, Iowa can provide substantial leadership in reversing the effects of climate change if we have support to do it. Now I ask Dr. Shaw to come forward and make some comments.
Thank you, Chris. Iowans are already seeing the health effects of climate change associated with following things. There is direct effect of climate change because of increased floods. There is an increase in number of allergens and the seasons of allergies. Because of the increased air pollutions, there is an increased number of asthmas in our children going to the ER visits. We are seeing more vector-borne, meaning mosquito and tick-borne illnesses, which were either not here or they are new to us. And for all of this, we are seeing more of mental health illness. Let me expand on a couple of them, see why they are working. Just to give you the example of allergies, because of increased allergies, because of increased temperature and increased CO2 in the air, our plants like ragweed and poison ivies are growing more, growing faster, and because of increased CO2 in the air, the ragweed's poisons, the proteins are stronger and causing more allergies. So that way, we are seeing longer seasons. So in Iowa itself, shown by national studies, we have 19 extra days of allergies, which we didn't see a few years ago. To give you the example of mosquito-borne and tick-borne illnesses, because of increased temperature, increased CO2, the mosquito tends to live longer. There's a direct, every degree rise in temperature, mosquito population grows by 8 to 10 folds. Let me repeat that. Every temperature increase by 1 degree is an 8 to 10 fold higher number of mosquitoes in the air. Second thing is the parasites which carries malaria or viruses like chikungunya and dengue, they grow faster. And third thing, with increased CO2 in the air, the female mosquito bites more frequently. And with all of that, we are seeing higher number of West Nile viruses. We are seeing cases like chikungunya coming from other states to us, and more dengue. Putting that all causing us more mental health issues because of flood, because of displacement. So as a physician, my strong recommendation is, yeah, we need to treat them acute cases of asthma in our children and West Nile virus and dengue, but more than that, we need to do to prevent and reduce these cases. Thank you.
Thanks, Jörg. So we have 3 major goals in releasing these statements. The first is to offer ourselves as resources, second is to share what we know, and the third is to encourage policy-related dialogue on the topic. This year, with presidential candidates in the state, it's important to focus on the third goal. Climate change is affecting Iowans and will continue to affect us in increasingly significant ways. It's not an issue that can be ignored. Iowans take our role in choosing candidates very seriously, and we deserve to have a clear picture of how each candidate plans to guide our country in the face of a changing climate. Moreover, the 188 signers who study and teach about climate speak with one voice in our effort to make extremely clear to Iowans and members of the news media how important this issue is to cover, to report on, and to ask candidates about. So thank you, and we'll now take questions.
Right. If it's flashing, do I push the button? It's okay. Okay. So I believe the question was, should weekends like this last weekend where we have heavy rain in the spring be something we expect more in the future? And the short answer is yes. It's one of the changes we've seen recently. It's directly tied to warmer ocean conditions in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. And then as we have storms coming through the Midwest in the future, which will always have storms in the Midwest, they will have more humidity available to them. So heavier rainfalls, like we have seen in the previous years and even this last weekend, are things we would expect to see more of in the future. Tornadoes are harder to talk about because it involves two factors. One is the humidity that allows the storms to form, and the other is the wind, the change in the wind speeds with height. There isn't really a causal mechanism between increases in greenhouse gases and climate warming and the change in height in our part of the world of wind. So there are two factors with tornadoes, and it's harder to say for certain whether the number of tornadoes will increase going forward or not. One thing we have seen recently, though, and that could be tied to the shift in storm location, is that the number of tornadoes in the Midwest, meaning Iowa, Kansas, and farther north into Minnesota, had been, until this spring, much more frequent than down in Oklahoma and Texas. And that is a shift that people are looking at in more detail to determine if that is, in fact, a climate change signal. At the moment, they can't say whether it is. In the future, it's a muddled picture for tornadoes. But what we do know for certain is with more humidity in the air, storms will have the energy they need to produce heavier rainfall and very likely more frequent hail.
You referenced 13,950 documents that point to humans as a cause of climate change, but
That's correct.
24 have not seen any presence. The fact that there are 24, your message to presidential candidates, I'm sure they'll cite the 24 if they don't believe that there is a problem with climate change.
I'm not really sure how to respond to 24 versus 13,750. That sounds like an overwhelming consensus, an overwhelming majority.
Is there a danger of stepping in and saying, giving a political message when it appears science is becoming politicized on this issue?
I'm not sure that I can answer what you're asking. The question is, there a danger of scientists?
You're injecting yourself into the political debate.
Oh.
And right now,
We have,
one of the problems
that's right.
with the political debate is science is becoming sort of a political football.
Well, we're entering this debate here in Iowa. We're trying to enter it in as a resource. And we are asking our citizens to take the resources that we have provided and use those to provide questions to the candidates. So we are providing as much factual information as we can about Iowa and it's about global climate change that we know from the scientific literature. And we're allowing our citizens to use that information to ask presidential candidates and other people looking to be elected to offices their political questions. So we are not raising any political questions at all. That's not our intent.
What do you say to the people who say this, there's nothing to this, that there is no climate change problem?
Well, there's, first of all, the 13,750 articles that I mentioned earlier, 950 articles I mentioned earlier, but there are also many large corporations who are beginning to agree that climate change has occurred. This includes the oil and gas industry itself, and also the food industry, food production industry. And the most recent example is Shell, whose CEO has come out and said flat out that climate change is a problem and Shell is not aligning with climate deniers. So there's not only the weight of scientific evidence, which is very, very weighty in my opinion, but there are people who have resources to make changes in our world, and they are saying we need to make changes because of climate change.
So as a physician, just to answer your question, that in science and whether it's medicine, health, we have always have, there is fewer, whether it might be 19 or 1% or 5.5% of reports which might be anti that or anti that. So just to give you the example of not directly to climate, but immunization. Even though we have multiple studies that it shows it works, of course there are 1 or 2 studies which come up and saying it doesn't work, and people then can take that as what they want.
Speakers, if you ask, this is the 5th year we've been to these basic economic reports, the scientists signing off to this. Can you point to any action that has resulted as a result of these surveys, or any inaction that you want to comment about?
Well, in terms of inaction, part of what we're trying to do this year specifically is remind people to raise this as a topic when you're talking with presidential candidates. Remind people how important this issue is for the future of Iowa and our country. We're using this statement to address what we view as potential inaction in previous election years. As far as specific areas where our statements have changed things, our goal isn't necessarily to introduce new types of legislation or topics like that. Our goal is to increase the discussion, to open the dialogue, and to remind people what climate scientists in this state are finding, and to also offer ourselves as resources so that people, as you can see from all corners of the state, can find someone that they can talk to and have a conversation with. So it's not just a question of reading in the newspaper about some scientists from somewhere else who say something that you may not you may have questions about. So the idea is we're offering ourselves as resources, and I think in that way there has been an impact. People have become aware of some specific topics or some specific impacts in Iowa, and also have had conversations with a large number of our signers, and I think that's been useful.
So one of the impact of our statements is last year, 2014, we focused on the health impacts of climate change. Out of that, few things happened. At Des Moines University, we started teaching our students on the health effects of climate change. We have a very nice article which came out, which I'll show you here, on the health effects, which happened to be read by national security, one of the officers in White House, Alice Hill. And then out of that came a meeting at the White House just recently to talk about at national level, how can we teach our healthcare students on the health effects of climate change. So hopefully there'll be more to come on that topic.
Yes, I can say that at the national level, I've been contacted by groups that have recognized what we're doing in Iowa, and that the fact that we have had such a broad base of scientific engagement in this with our partners across the state. And the National Climate Assessment, which was issued just a little over a year ago, involved climate scientists from Iowa in the agriculture chapter, and data from Iowa was essentially a part of that. So I think it's fair to say that we are getting attention at the national level. The National Climate Assessment, should also be pointed out, offers solutions that we do have issues we need to deal with, but there are solutions. There are things we can do and we should be doing, and it's identified issues here in Iowa that we can do at very low cost. So I think it is making a difference, and I think the public is starting to recognize that.
I would just follow up more in terms of Iowa. I've received a lot of contacts from people in Iowa. I would say on average I get about 6 to 10 contacts a week from people in Iowa who are farmers, who are engineering firms, who are city governments, who are county governments, and who are state agencies. They come to me and ask about climate change impacts in Iowa, and in fact recently we just completed a study for the Iowa DOT.
I just wanted to follow up, Diane Dubinsky from Iowa State. Chris Anderson and I are part of the North Central Climate Science Center, which is a consortium of several universities across the states, and they've been very impressed that the scientists of Iowa have come together to make a statement, because in many of the other states that is not what they're seeing. So they were impressed by this collaborative effort that we have.
David, I have a question for you. If an Iowan goes to a forum, has an opportunity to ask a question of a presidential candidate and says, what policies do you support to address climate change in Iowa? And their response is, I don't recommend any policy because I don't believe in the existence of it. I deny that it's a problem. What's the response?
Right. So there are two potential responses that come from that question. So a lot of the candidates, what they may say, sorry, let me step back. The answer to the question of, I don't believe in climate change is that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that climate change is happening. And certainly we are willing to, sit down with candidates and talk to them about the question of whether it's happening and what the evidence is that it's happening, and also that it's anthropogenic, so that it's caused by people. That's something that's happened in maybe the last 10 years as we become better and better at attributing the changes. We're seeing the changes that distinguish human-caused climate change from climate change that might be, caused by natural oscillations and so on. So one answer would be, would you take some time to sit down with some scientists and go over your concerns? Because certainly, regardless of what you believe to be the proper response, I think everybody wants to work with the facts, right? So I feel like our goal is to educate people so that they understand what is happening, in the natural system, right? Now, politicians may come up with different policy responses to that, and we're not trying to claim that our expertise is to identify specific policy responses. Our expertise is in identifying what's going on so that people have all the information they need to make informed choices. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, thank you all so much for coming. We'll be around for a little while. If you have specific questions for any of us, please feel free to ask. And thank you again for coming here.